Shabbos, everybody. Good Shabbos. Hi. Good to see you all. Nice to be with you. Hope everybody's doing okay. I think that this extra earlier 15 minutes has significantly, I think, distinguished the hardcore open bookers, right? You're like, you're open, you're up early, 15 minutes, no big deal. Wonderful. Okay, let's start with our learning this morning. Let's start with some Birchot Torah. The text have been placed, I think, into the. Pretty sure the text should be in the. Yeah, there they go. Thank you, Anna, so much. And you know what, Anna? Can you do me a favor? I'll share the text. I mean, you can leave this here. I'll share the next text. You can stop the screen share in a second after this. So let's see who's here for to read. Is Karen Fried available? I can't see on my screen anymore. I'm like in full screen. So Karen, can you read the Birchot Torah this morning? I saw Karen there for a second.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen. Amen, amen. All right, so let's give me back the power to screen share. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And there you go. All right. Can y'all see it? Awesome. I'm going to move this over. We're going to learn How's it going now, Jay? Can you see it? You still can't see it. All right. How about you, Asher Chaim? Can you see it? Time out on the floor. Go ahead, Asher Chaim. Jay, what's going on?
I don't think the link is working properly to the original text. So maybe the link could be reposted, please. I don't know if anyone else is having that issue.
It's a PDF, so it's not working.
Maybe it's just me. I don't know.
Okay, we could try it again. We could try that link again. We'll see if it works. Okay. And should we try it again? Anybody else having a problem with downloading the link? Oh no, it's working for Paul. It's working for Beth. Okay, Asher Chaim. People see it. They printed it. They got it.
When I downloaded it, it was not automatically opening with Adobe.
I see. Got it. Okay. I don't. Good luck. I don't know. I think that we'll maybe try to do some fixing of that, some tikkun. I don't know really. We can just give you the PDF, and if that's the only, you know, what we could do. We could also send you the. Give me a chance here to. I can send the link from Safaria. That might work better for you, Jay. Okay, so let's do that. That's one problem solved that I might be able to help out with here. And when I stop share for 1 second, just one more second, we'll just get it. Ay 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 dum bum 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 ay 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 bum bum bum. Let's see if this works. Bum 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 bum. Try that out. Better? Okay. Gesundheit. Great. All right. Open book. Take 2. And action. All right. Can you see it now on the screen? All right, let's go. Bavakasha, Marcy, can you see the text in front of you? Yep. Okay, I'm going to invite Marcy. Can you read the text? Because I'm going to do we'll do a Hebrew English read, okay? We'll go back and forth. Okay, ready?
Yes.
I'll do one verse at a time. I'll stop at the end of the verse, and then you go in the English, okay? We'll do one verse per person.
Okay.
ויקם בלילה ההוא, ויקח את 2 נשיו, ואת 2 שפחותיו, ואת 11 ילדיו, ויעבור את מעבר יבוק.
That same night he arose, and taking his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 children, he crossed the ford of the Yabok.
ויקחם, ויעבירם את הנחל, ויעבר את אשר לו. ויעבר את אשר לו.
After taking them across the stream, he sent across all his possessions.
ויוותר יעקב לבדו, ויאבק איש עמו עד עלות השחר.
Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn.
וירא כי לא יכול לו, ויגע בכף ירכו, ותקע כף ירך יעקב בהיאבקו עמו.
When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him.
ויאמר שלחני, כי עלה השחר, ויאמר לא אשלחך, כי אם ברכתני.
Then he said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me."
ויאמר אליו מה שמך, ויאמר יעקב.
Said the other, "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob."
ויאמר לא יעקב, יאמר עוד שמך, כי אם ישראל, כי שרית עם אלוהים ועם אנשים ותוכל.
Said he, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with beings divine and human and have prevailed."
וישאל יעקב ויאמר הגידה נא שמך, ויאמר למה זה תשאל לשמי, ויברך אותו שם.
Jacob asked, "Pray tell me your name." But he said, "You must not ask my name." And he took leave of him there.
ויקרא יעקב שם המקום פניאל, כי ראיתי אלוהים פנים אל פנים, ותנצל נפשי.
So Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning, "I have seen a divine being face to face, yet my life has been preserved."
ויזרח לו השמש כאשר עבר את פנואל, והוא צולע על ירחו.
The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping on his hip.
Thank you so much for that, Marcy. Yeah, Asher Kochech. So many things in this story. We do this story pretty frequently in various contexts, and I think it's just worth looking at over and over again and just hearing people's impressions. And it's as close as we can come to a very clear expression of mythic, obviously the Garden of Eden and others, but within a narrative itself, this is such a remarkable piece. I spoke about this last night. So I wanted us to take a look at some of the different pieces within this part of the story. I wanted to place some close attention just before we go to the questions that I enumerated later. Just go into some of the wordplay here that for some of you who are not familiar with the Hebrew, this might be a little bit like, hold on. But for those of us who are, for whom the Hebrew here is very significant, meaning like you can hear in it such profound, what are called light words, or words that kind of repeat themselves over and over again in order to signal to us, hey, look at this. Let's just look at these verses for some repetitions and for some word plays that are in this before we move in the direction of a more conceptual reading of this. Vayakam balaylahu, and in the evening he arose. So first of all, we'll talk to this in a moment, but even without wordplay, evening is a very special Jacob time, right? Jacob and the evening have a lot in common. Jacob is someone who leaves his family home, and immediately evening descends on him. And so as he is making his way back to reconcile with his family, of course, the setting has to be the evening, right? He has the dreams in the evening. He has the visions in the evening. He steals away from his father-in-law Laban by night, right? So something important happens by night in Jacob's own story. And of course, in stories of heroes' journeys, dark nights of the soul and evening where things are happening in the dark and where shadows proliferate, that's a very important part of this story. As soon as you know that, he arises in the night and he takes his two wives and the two maidservants and all of their children. And here's the first wordplay here, which will come back in the last verse. Vaya'avor et ma'avar yabok. Now, just looking at these four words together, right? He crosses the ford of the Yabok. You can see how pitiful the translation is relative to the Hebrew resonance, right? Like in Hebrew, right? He's passing over a ford, and the name of the word in Hebrew for a ford or this kind of juncture, this river belly is called ma'avar, right? So he's crossing over the crossing of Yabok, right? So the repetition of this word la'avor, to cross over, is significant. It's significant because to cross over here is right. It has so many valencies, so many meanings. Like what's crossing over? Who's crossing over? What is being transformed? What is being transgressed? What's transing? It's trans, right? Today, November 20th is, of course, Transgender Remembrance Day today, right? This kind of this transitional, this liminality between this refusal to be either this or that, right? To be categorized and to be binaried. There's something profoundly important about this phrase, Vaya'avor et ma'avar yabok. And of course, the word yabok can't help but trigger in us how close it is to the sound of the name of Jacob himself, right? The letters, right, for all intents and purposes, are the name Yaakov, just in another form. Ya'abok, Yaakov. So you have this already happening in the first verse of this mythic structure. You already have Vaya'avor et ma'avar yabok. He's going to be crossing over. Vayikachem va'yavirem, and then the word appears again, right? Va'yavirem. He crosses them over. You see that in the purple? Va'yavirem. And then it appears again, Vaya'aver et asher lo, and it happens again. Now, those of you who think that Jacob and Abraham are connected, as the original, the grandfather of Jacob is connected to Jacob and Jacob's life. Of course, Abraham is called the Ivri, the one who crosses over. So here Jacob now, for 4 times in 2 verses, the word Ya'avor, La'avor, happens, right? Something is happening here. Vayivater Yaakov levado, and Jacob is left alone. And then the second really important word, of course, in this story is Vaya'avek, and that he is something with some mysterious mysterious unnamed person. Of course, that's also significant in a story where the most important moment of the story later on will be the naming of Jacob. Here, the person that is unnamed is a crucial figure in this hero's journey. So he's la'avek. We don't really know what that means. Wrestling with him. We'll get to that a little bit later. That's the second light vort. Vayar, and he sees in verse 26, ki lo yachol lo, and someone couldn't prevail over him. Lo yachol lo. Vayiga b'chaf Yericho, vateka kaf Yerech Yaakov, and Jacob's Yerech, his hip, is teka. It's a strange word, but it means that here we're going to say it's dislocated, or it's moved, or it's set. And the word again, he'avko, appears again to highlight it for us. So this word kaf is also important, and the word yerech is important. Hip and hip socket. Vayomer, send me, send me because the sun is rising. Allah hashachar. He says, no, I'm not sending you until you bless me. Till you bless me is important. But Jacob says, I'm not, and then this mysterious person says, Ma shmecha, what is your name? And he says, Jacob. And then he says, no, Jacob is not your name, right? It's not any longer. But rather, your name will be Israel because you have striven, or you have been made princely through your struggles. And then the word again, vatuchal, that you did, you were able. Now that, okay, so together with La'avor, to cross over, and then the word to wrestle, or avak, and then the words, right, yachol, you can, or you're able to, you can prevail. Those are, right, vital. And he asks him the question, what is your name? And so that becomes now, okay, the word appears over again, the word for name appears over and over again, right? What's your name? Why do you ask me about my name? Right? Name. And then Jacob, right, in verse 31 will tell us that there's something about facing, and then we come back in verse 32 finally. Vayizrach lo hashemesh, and the sun is now shining, or it's radiating for him. Doesn't say his name, but him. And ka'asher avar, as he is now avar epnuel, as he is now, this word appears again finally, as he is now passing over, or moving over the place called the face of God. And now lastly, v'hu tzoleya, and he is tzoleya, which is a very, very strange word, on his hip, limping on his hip. Okay, so this is the kind of the word plays on those words in particular are bringing us into this story. So let's look at the way that Rashi, the great medieval exegete, on the first question of what it was in verse 23 that made him come back over, right? And I'm sorry, in verse 24. Verse 24, it says that Jacob takes his family over to one side of the Nachal, one side of the river, or of the water body, and then he vaya'aver et asher lo, and then he kind of comes back. Like, it's a very strange moment in the story. So what does Rashi say? So Rashi essentially says, listen, he was acting like a ferryman, right? He was bringing his own things over. Asa atzmo ki gashar, notel mikan maniach kan. He was like a ferryman. He would take things from one side and he would set them down on the other, right? And so essentially, what's Rashi's understanding of like what was Jacob's role? Jacob is like, he's going back and forth. Rashi's not reading this mythically. He's reading this story as a kind of a literal story. Here we are. Jacob's taking the things from one side to the other side. That's what his job is. Just a ferryman. I'm just doing my job. Now, what is it though that brings him back to the other side of the Yabok ford? In other words, that he's all by himself. How does he find himself alone? Because at some point in the text, we don't, right, on a literal level, just reading the text literally without getting to the mythic mind, like Jacob should be on the other side with all of his things. Why was he alone? The next verse says he's alone. How did he get to be alone? Right? What brought him back that made him alone? So essentially Rashi says that he forgot these small jars that we talk about almost every year. They're these little pachim ktanim. The Gemara says, the Talmud says that he shachach pakim kitanim b'chazar alehem. The Talmud in Chulin says that, how do you understand the fact that Jacob is all by himself? He should have been on the other side with all of his possessions and with all of his family, and the very next verse says that he's alone. He went back because he forgot some very precious things and he went back to get them. Okay. The Ramban, Nachmanides, doesn't like that. He says, he quotes Rashi here. This is the Ramban, Nachmanides in the 12th century, in the 13th century. He says, he's going to quote Rashi. He says, right, that Jacob left, he had forgotten some small jars. I'm over here, in this text here. It says, Ramban says that Rashi here quotes the Talmud and says that he forgot some small jars. But in line with the plain meaning of Scripture, it means that he made his family pass together with him, and then, he went back to the camp after ferrying his family across. He commanded that all others pass over the brook before him, and so he remained behind them. So Ramban says it's not a problem, right? There's no problem with the text. It's like he didn't have to go back to get something. He was going back and forth. That was what it was. And he told other people to take his family to the final destination, and that was his job, was to go back and forth. That's what Jacob was. He was passing back and forth and working in that way. So that's the kind of like the simple meaning of the text. No one here is working within a mythic structure. They're just trying to make sense of this story, this simple story. And in the same way, right, you would think that you would imagine that they should give us a simple meaning of the text when it comes to the wrestling that goes on. What's the wrestling, right? Is there a simple meaning of the wrestling match, right? Since both Rashi and the Ramban and all these other commentators are working within some kind of like simple meaning of the text, what should be the simple meaning of this Vaye'avek ish, right? The second question, which is, who does he wrestle with, right? So Rashi here says Vayit ish, that he quotes this early source called Menachem ben Seruk, right? Rashi says that this Vaye'avek, this strange word to wrestle, Vaye'avek, right? He wrestled with him, means that the wrestling is connected to the word avak, which is dust, because he was dusting it up, right? Quotes this Menachem, who says that it is, right, there's something having to do with dust, and then Rashi offers his own interpretation. Rashi says something remarkable. He says that the word vayavek, which means to wrestle, which could be connected to the word dust. He had quoted someone who said that it was dusting it up, that they were getting all dusty because they were wrestling together. That it's connected to an Aramaic word, which means that they were connected. They were tied in with one another. And he brings this wild explanation that this is, and the Ramban will also bring this too, that there's some Aramaic moment in the text. The Aramaic moment is like the word avuka in Aramaic, or in Hebrew actually, it means like some kind of a bonfire, which is made up of little pieces that are connected together. So too, this is kind of like, and they came together as if like, the wrestling match is some kind of union that's taking place. The way that a bonfire is made up of disparate pieces and brought together. That's the wrestling match. And then he goes on to say this, and who is the one that he's wrestling with? He quotes the Midrash that says that the Ish, this mysterious man, is Saro Shel Esav, is the angel, the archangel of Esau. which is a pretty wild thing. Just to think about that for a moment. Like they're trying to understand this text, right? They're trying to understand the text in some, right, simple, elegant way. And they're trying not to, get involved in too much of a mythic structure around the text, this mythic story. Nobody is calling any attention to the repetitions of the words. But in some way, they come up on a question in the story that they can't explain. And the question of the story is, okay, there's a wrestling match. Okay, he's alone. I don't know how he got to be alone, but just the simple meaning is that he was bringing things over. And all of a sudden, they stop this kind of elegant explanation of the simple meaning of the text, and all of a sudden they're in some great mystery. Who is this Ish? Who is this mysterious Ish, this like unnamed source? And now there's a full-on mythic understanding. Jacob is now alone to wrestle with the archangel of Esau before he's about to wrestle or meet his actual brother Esau. So here's the text becomes almost unintelligible to these commentators the minute it meets this Ish, this man, right? All of a sudden, this man, this wild being, is stops them in their tracks, and they recognize to some degree that what we're speaking about here is something altogether beyond like the simple meaning of any text, and it can't really be explained grammatically. It can't be explained with reference to inner parts of the story. This really is a mythic text. And then you see wildly that now they start to begin to understand this story in the language of generational conflict and generational possibilities, and the Midrash begins to explode with really the profound possibilities of this, maybe the most important moment to this point in the book of Genesis, right? This is a moment unlike any other narratives up to this point, this mysterious introduction of this Ish. And so what might it mean? So essentially, what might it mean if we were to explore the recognition that the archangel of Esau is this mysterious wrestling partner? What does it mean to wrestle? Why would he be wrestling with the archangel of Esau? Now, for the rabbis, right, this archangel of Esau will represent a transgenerational struggle between the children of Yaakov and the children of Esau. There is no denouement that's happening here in the rabbinic construction. The rabbis are not seeing this wrestling match with Jacob and Esau as like Jacob's comeuppance, that this is the moment in Jacob's life where he has to kind of reconcile. This is a fight to the death for the sake of, right, in the rabbis' reading of this, for the sake of the Jewish people, for the sake of their own continuity, for the sake of the children of Jacob that would come one day. And the rest of the story begins to morph around that. Like, what exactly is the meaning of this, what's called Maseh Avot Siman Labanim, that this story is an archetype for all of Jewish history and for all future moments between the children of Esau and the children of Jacob, right? And so that's the way they begin to understand it. And then, of course, for them, you'll see in a moment, right, the wrestling match and then the subsequent wounding becomes instructive in terms of the rest of Jewish history for them. That's the kind of one angle. I think there's a much more elegant and simple angle, right, which I'm sure many of you want to relay, the kind of psycho-spiritual and broader mythic understanding of what's taking place in here, based upon those light vorts, based upon those words that don't seem to be picked up by the rabbis. We'll get to that in a moment. I did want to show you some of those readings before we launch back into a more elegant and simple reading. So before I take questions and comments, let me just take a little look at this text here, the text from the rabbis on the meaning of the wrestling, and from a kind of a broader perspective in Jewish history, right? So the Rashbam, I'm sorry, let's see one second. Let's see. You know what? Let me take comments because I can't find the source right now. So let me just take comments. They might lead me to just say out loud without looking at the text what those are. So let's see. Beth, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
I have a couple of comments. First of all, in our modern parlance, we refer to a fight as a dust up. So I think that has some resonance with Abak. And we also talk about wrestling with our demons. And I had never heard this midrash before, that this was Esau's guardian angel. And it makes a really nice kind of sense, because here's Jacob preparing for a battle with his brother. He sent his family away so that his wives and his children and some of his belongings are protected. And he's assuming he's going to have a battle. And instead, the angel shows up and they wrestle and they come to a draw. And then the fighting is done. And then when Jacob and Esau do meet, they embrace. So I think the sages who came up with this midrash hit on something really nice.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that I agree with you in. I'd love to like explore the. It looks like we're not gonna have enough time to actually follow the flow of the class that I had originally attended. So let's just we're just gonna throw everything like comments. Let's just have a schmooze because clearly I see at least 10 hands. So in the introduction of the Sarosh Esav, that theme of Sarosh Esav, you have the harbinger on some level of what we might say is kind of Jungian notions of shadow work, right? The experience of like, okay, there's going to be some wrestling match, and here by wrestling here, there's going to be some kind of unification. There's going to be some kind of owning. There's going to be some kind of integration. All of those very anachronistic and later understandings of Sarosh Esav, I think, are implicit in the Sarosh Esav. Obviously, the notion of Sarosh Esav, the archangel of Esav, at least in the way that our ancestors have understood it for the last 2,000 years, wasn't exactly the notion of shadow work or kind of working with our demons. It actually was rooted in mundane astrology, essentially. The notion that every nation has its own archetypal ruler is a notion from what's called mundane astrology, mundus meaning the world, and that each country has a chart, as it were, and has a planet or some kind of constellation that it rules. And we assimilated that idea into our own worldview. And then we essentially had rulerships for various nations had a ruler and peoples had a ruler. And it was actually rooted in a kind of essentialism that Esau has an archangel, and that before we can prevail here in the terrestrial plane, we have to prevail in the celestial plane. Right, and in some way, the ways that the rabbis constructed this, and then later generations read this, was actually not as an internal battle inside of Jacob, but as something that was foreshadowing the eventual prevailing over Esau. But of course, the problem with that is that it doesn't really seem like that Jacob prevails. It just means that he didn't lose, and if anything, Jacob is the one that's wounded. Right? But in the rabbinic mind, the fact that Jacob could extract a blessing from this archangel becomes the kind of victory, the great victory, that he was like that he should have lost, but he didn't. And I think that, at least in this reading, and I'm just going to tell you what these later sources and the way that it was read for a couple thousand years was, that this was going to intimate that no matter how bad the eventual exile would be, and the rabbis understood exile here to be an exile during the time of Christianity, the Great Exile, and that Edom becomes in the rabbinic mind Christendom, right? And Esau becomes, believe it or not, like the Christian archetype. And so, no matter how bad it gets, later generations would say we would still extract blessing. We would wind up limping away, but we would never ever be completely destroyed. And so this becomes, in the Midrashic mind, a story of hope, a story of continuity, of resilience, of capacity. and but also a warning that in our conflicts and in our coming into contact with those other cultures, in particular in the exile, that we wouldn't leave unscathed. But of course, in your reading, Beth, here, like Sarosh Esav becomes like the harbinger again of what I think is a much more elegant reading in our modern period of what really takes place in this mythic story between Jacob and this mysterious Ish. So I want to thank you for that and invite, let's see, Debbie, go ahead.
Shabbat
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom. And in the wrestling part of all this, Jacob's renamed. His original name means heel or something to that effect. Heal or Heel. So if we think of the healing that we're looking to do, when the archangel from his brother, who he was holding on to, he let go to some degree and became Israel, it was the shift within his own paradigm. And I see it as him wrestling with part of his self, his shadow side.
Yeah. Nice. We're going to get to that. So anybody that has any, like we're going to get a little bit into like reading that in the text, because I know that we could talk about it. I want to see it in the text and then we can talk about it. So go ahead. Thank you, Debbie. I love that. Go ahead. I think Jay was next. Go ahead, Jay.
Yes, Shabbat Shalom. This
Shalom.
may be reprising a word you used earlier, wild, and I realize this is a wild interpretation, but I'm still stuck at Vayakam Balayla. And you intimated earlier, I think you can't not connect it to the other peak Lila experience, which is, of course, the dream with, angels, messengers going up and down the ladder. Now, I know that Vayikam wouldn't be used to climb a ladder, but still, I'm left with this notion that here Jacob is actually climbing up the ladder or somehow interacting with those angels going up and down the ladder, and that maybe this is a dream or part of a dream again.
Yeah, that's certainly that's certainly. If you look into Chama Leibowitz and other commentators, modern commentators who look at the at the material of our ancestors, the commentators essentially say there's a huge disagreement about whether or not this is actually taking place in a dream or not. And I love that Nechama Leibowitz essentially says, listen, either way, whether it's in a dream or not, like the meaning of this, right, is still, the meaning of the dream is also still, up for grabs. And so it could be that he's having all of this happening in a dream, and it is a kind of vision of the future, and it could be that it's not. But either way, its meaning is still up for grabs, like what's actually happening, right?
To tie this to your comment just before, I think seeing it as a dream does somewhat privilege this whole interiority, that it's a sense that something coming out of Yaakov that he has to deal with.
Right. That's partially true. It's only partially true in the sense that we as moderns see dreams as an expression of our inner psychic realities as opposed to something external. In the Torah, it's very hard to read it that way. I mean, often dreams in the Torah are prophetic and portend external events, not internal ones. But yes, a dream is certainly more interior than it happening on a particular geographic Google it and let's find where it's happening kind of place. And that's certainly the case. And thank you for that, Jay. Okay. Tsomi, go ahead. I would love to sit with each of you for more than 5 minutes, but I'm moving as quickly because there are a lot of hands and I still have some things to say myself. So go ahead, Tsomi.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
It's so nice to go through these things every year. And then every year I just hear, all of us probably hear something different each time. And this time must have been something about the way you phrased it, but it was just feeling very parallel to me with another story of a similar region, but a little bit older, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And that striking similarity for me of like the wild man and the fight between them, and then creating this incredible, loving, almost homoerotic bond between these two people. There was just something about the language and the way that you phrased it that was so similar. And I don't know what that means, but that's what it is. And it's also hard to not separate it today with Trans Day of Remembrance, having lost so many, and how that struggle is I mean, there's the parallel in that there's a struggle, but the difference is that so many trans people don't make it out alive, and that's not a choice. And it just feels very meaningful, and I have nothing but these comments. I don't have any solutions on it, just thinking.
Yeah, no, these things don't need a solution. Actually, they're just telling a story that really, in fact, someone once said, of course, around myth and heroes' journeys, that myth in some form is a story that can't be spoken but must be told, and the telling of the story each and every year, and especially as we read it, I think, and more, the more we look at the story through a literary lens, because we didn't read these stories; they were told. Right? They were listened to. There were stories that before we had books to look at, there were stories that we would hear resonance and homonyms and words that would repeat themselves over and over again would give a valence that interpretation would sometimes disclose and sometimes obfuscate. So certainly in the case of Jacob wrestling with this person we're going to get to, hopefully I don't know if we're going to get to it. I'm hoping that we're going to get to some of what's in here around that obviously we're talking about a split and a binarism that isn't that the text doesn't reward. The text will say that you're going to become Jacob, but then Jacob is never only known as Israel. He's always oscillating between multiple identities and multiple frames. And the dance itself, which is a wrestling match, which is deeply homoerotic. I mean, we're not queering the text when we look at it that way at all. It's just right there. My dear friend Rabbi Steve Greenberg, who wrote a book called Wrestling with Jacob, Wrestling with Gods and Men. There is something profoundly, I think, kismet or hashgacha that today is Trans Remembrance Day, because this text is an incredibly important text in shedding light, as it were, on the shadow of our culture in that way. So I thank you for bringing that to Tzomi. And we're going to move to Richard. Go ahead, Richard.
There we go. Good morning, David. Good to see you.
Good morning, Richard. Good to see you.
Building a little bit on Jay's comment, linking the ladder or whatever that is, the climbing dream, this one, and the eventual meeting with Esau that occurs shortly after this. Jacob was inactive in the latter dream. He became active afterwards by sanctifying the spot where he had the dream. But in the dream itself, he was a witness. He didn't do anything. Here, of course, treating again as a dream, he was quite active. He was wrestling, and for me, I think he was wrestling with his own family difficulties, and particularly the way he and his mother treated Esau, the way he cheated Esau, and that has to carry a mark in his personality. And at least at some level, although perhaps many other things too, I think he had to be wrestling with that.
Yeah, I think that
he didn't really prevail.
Yeah.
He prevailed partly. Then later in the meeting with Esau, there was this hug, which suggests it's growing. I'll be done real quick. He was growing into something with Esau. But then after that hug, when Esau asked Jacob to come with him, he said he would, and then he didn't. So there's this partial recovery, but it's clearly to me incomplete.
Yeah.
And still needs a lot of work that never happens. Yeah. Maybe that's one of the reasons why Israel and Jacob flow back and forth, because he's never really Israel.
So let me underscore what you're saying by giving some textual evidence for it. Number one, and especially given in the light of some of the word plays in the text, it's certainly the case that Jacob is trying to give back to Esau in this presentation of all of these gifts, that which he thinks he's stolen. And he says the word birchati, minchati over and over again in the text. When he finally meets him, he says, my mincha, my gift to you, my blessing to you, over and over again. He's trying to, in some way, unburden himself or pay back what he thinks that he's stolen. The word stealing, of course, appears as a light vort in last week's Torah portion. I mean, you can't, you knock into the word for stealing everywhere you go in last week's Torah portion with Laban, right? He's constantly thinking about the things that either was stolen from him or he stole, right? And then, of course, it happens to him, right? His wife, Rachel, steals. I mean, it's all over the place. So in the way that Freud would say that you can't not know the truth, but it just seeps out everywhere, the text is this kind of seepage of Jacob's stories happening over and over again, and it really underscores the overwhelming sense that we get from the text that Jacob is holding on to what took place, and certainly maybe even more than Esau is, frankly. That's kind of interesting just to think that maybe he holds it more than Esau, number one. And number two, also to underscore what you're saying, in that Jacob, in some of the rabbinic literature, Jacob's promise to go meet Esau again is held out by the rabbis as a problem. He said that he would go meet his brother, but then he didn't. And in fact, in later Jewish history, there were some who argued that, I mean, again, I don't agree with this argument, but there were those who converted, the Frankists were the ones who converted, who said that part of the text was, there was an incomplete journey of Jacob to meet Esau, which can only be completed by those Jews who make their journey and transform themselves into, quote unquote, the embodiment of Esau in Christianity. There's kind of one theme around that. But of course, again, like we don't have to be historical about it. It is a journey on some level of each family and each person to reconcile with members of their family, or reconcile with members of their internal family, if you believe in internal family systems, whatever it might be. And it also shows that Jacob, no matter how far he's transformed, is still, triggered being around his brother. like he said, I'm going to come meet you, and like I'm done. I've done 20 years of therapy, and then he still is very evasive around it because it's too thick. It activates him in too thick a way. And yeah, so Jacob's journey is not complete. And you see that, of course, in the Joseph narrative too. Whatever Jacob is bringing with him, he passes it forward too, in a very, in some way. So thank you for that. Harley, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Actually, I'll use the segue of the Frankists. When I took my first introduction class at Hebrew University in Jewish history, my dad used to say, "Oh, we got our name because we were part of Charlemagne." And after reading about the Frankists, I said, Dad, I think our origins could have been way less lofty. So I'll make this quick. Not all blessings are blessings. And sometimes in this story, I just saw this. You have to kind of be careful what you wish for. But to me, the naming of Israel the blessing wasn't so much that the name is not so much of a statement, but is conditional. And I'm focused on the word here, im. So Jacob will be Israel it isn't always figured out, if he struggles and is successful. And, that's kind of been his and our, plight, is that struggle is going to be, that the struggle is going to be there, but we only become that name who we're supposed to be if we are successful.
Okay. I'm not sure if I agree with the read, but I agree with the sentiment. I think that it's certainly the case that I don't know that it's conditional in that way, but I do believe that we fully embody the name when we live up to it, right? And I think that sometimes we do fall far from it, but that's also part of the human condition. But I agree with you that I think what you're saying is so obviously true, and I appreciate your saying it. Okay, thank you, Harley. And maybe you are a Frankist. I don't know. Could be. Nehemiah, and I'm just gonna Nehemiah, and then I'm gonna do a little bit of teaching, and then we'll come back. Okay, Nehemiah.
Later, please. Later.
Okay, there won't be a later because we're
okay. Then I'll say now. I'm not fully ready, but I'll say now. The story, like all truths, have many panim, many aspects. At this moment, we are 30-some people, 60-some people, 60-some bodhisattvas, tzaddikim, and we are also one reality that we don't see. The Ish is the archangel of Esav. The Ish is his shadow, but he at the end sees the Ish in the deepest way, because he say, Pniel, I saw God face to face. He got the insight. And I thought, used to think that he became realized, and I was wrong. Abraham became realized, Joseph became realized, Jacob was still a transactional relationship with God. And therefore, he was a transmitter of the Kabbalah and a great father of us, a great being, but he didn't let go surrender totally to God. He was still having a transactional relationship. Every time, if you do this for me, I'll do this. If you do this to me, I'll do this. Because he's not totally surrendered to God. But in one time, at that time, he got to a very high state, which he was able to maintain to a high level, but not to surrender fully to God. Sorry, I love Jacob, and I love Israel, and I love all of us, but it's hard to get to merge totally in God. It's not easy.
תודה. תודה רבה. Okay. Leonard, go ahead.
What I was thinking about is we're really talking about how people can engage in forgiveness and how Isaac is actually paying a tremendous price. His hip is injured. He's crippled for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And how what gets in the way of our ability to forgive is that we can't forget the hurts that have happened before. So one of the excuses we give for not being able to forgive the behaviors of others is thinking about what's happened to us or what happened to us before. So if my uncle was murdered by the Nazis, how could I possibly forgive them? That because I'm not showing respect to my ancestors. So it makes it very, very hard to forgive.
So I want to. So let's stop there for a second and go back into the text. And there's I know that there are quite a number of you who are still wanting to speak, and we have about 8 minutes or so until maybe a little bit more. But let's look at the text as it was constructed. So Jacob essentially is about to meet his brother, and in the text wants us to know that this is a very big deal. The text wants us to come to a place where we recognize how scared Jacob is. He's completely terrified. He sends in the text, he's trying to prepare himself in every possible way for what he thinks is an extremely dangerous and contingent moment. He splits his camp, which of course is another expression of being split, and in some profound way, Jacob imagines that he can save his family, and in some profound way, he wants to save his family, right? He wants to save his family. He sends them to the other side of the Yabok River, and then when he stands alone on the backside, it's as if now he is completely cut all of his ties with everything that has become himself after he left Esau. And so now when he is back alone, in some profound way, he is no longer the man who is the accomplished man. He is no longer the man who has, the family that he has built. He doesn't have anything to hide. He's completely and utterly alone in that profound sense, as if he were just born. And of course, when he was born, though, he wasn't born alone, right? In some profound way, Jacob has always been with. Everything about Jacob's life is to be with, right? He always does something with someone. And the only 2 times that the text ever tells us that he's alone, actually, is when he leaves his family and when he's now standing by himself. Number one. Number 2, to be alone in the Torah is always precarious, right? To be alone in the Torah is always pointing towards existential aloneness, right? Vayivater Yaakov levado. The only other time the word levado appears in the Torah is in the book of Genesis, where it says it's not good to be alone. Lo tov hayot adam levado. Levado appears twice. It's there in the beginning of the Torah, and then it appears here. So Jacob's aloneness now is a radical aloneness that is, in some sense, portending some kind of lo tov. It's not good, potentially. Another signal here that when it says that he is alone, I didn't actually allude to this, but Shmuel Klistner has pointed this out. The word vayivater, that he was left alone, doesn't appear ever in the Torah. This is the only time it appears. There's one other time the word vayivater appears, but it's spelled differently. It's spelled not with a vav, but with a bet or a vet. Vayivater, batar. In the Brit Ben Habtarim, where Abraham is splitting the animals, right? It's called the covenant of the pieces because batar or vater means with a bet means to split. It's a homonym, right? But it's right when you hear the word vayivater, it means he was split into his aloneness. He was split in his aloneness, or in his aloneness, he felt his split. Right? By being alone, he could experience the split. Vayivater Yaakov, levado. And so we have here like a profound, like I think very textually rooted invitation to look at what everybody has been alluding to here, which is this split, this kind of this confrontation with something. The second word, vayavek, that the second light vort, which is that he wrestled, avak, like it's this dusting up, this avak is very much connected, of course, with heels, with feet, right? When we speak of dusting things up, it usually is the product of some kind of like when you walk. Avak regel is the most common phrase. The dust of your feet. Jacob is coming to terms with everything that has to do with his legs. With his legs, he's named for a leg. He's named for holding on to someone else's leg, right? And being like he was birthed into the world by the energetic propulsion of his brother's legs. His brother's energy was what brought him into the world. He's being brought into the world by the legs of his brother. And Jacob's own life is really Vayisa Yaakov et raglav. He's always lifting his legs and running somewhere. He's always moving. He's moving. He's moving. He's always on the run. And so Jacob all of a sudden now begins to touch on the place where we would say like where the things are often not seen, or things that are not, he comes to wrestle with his own restlessness. He wrestles with being restless and with his own movement. And in his wrestling, of course, it's kind of remarkable, right, that he is wrestling and he gets wounded in this kaf yerech, which is the third light vort, this wounded thigh socket. It's like, what is the thigh socket? Like, what is that? Why there? Clearly, it could be connected to his sexual organs. There's, yerech is often spoken of as a euphemism for the genitalia, right? When Abraham makes his servant swear, he puts his hand under his yerecho, under his thigh, but it's a euphemism for genitalia, which also can mean also with. He's wounded in the sense that it's another way of saying it is that the future generations have also already been infected with your wound. You haven't you passed it forward, right? But in some profound way, it also means that through this wrestling match, there's a tikkun in that place. Like there is a tikkun in that place. There might be some way that this wrestling match actually might. The yield that will come from this moment forward will become a healing. And of course, that is true, right? Benjamin is the reason why the family heals, right? There are no future children at this point other than Benjamin. And Benjamin is the one who will be the reason why the brothers can finally reconcile, right? So there is in this moment of his hip, like conceptually, like there's something there, but also on a simpler level, once he's wounded in his thigh, he can't run. He's now been slowed down. And then the naming of that wound, as Shmuel Klistner points out so powerfully, that Hagida Nashmecha, tell me your name, and Gidha Nashe sound very similar. Tell me your name and the name of the vein that he is wounded in are very similar. And the word for the vein that he is wounded in, Gidha Nashe, is really the word Nashe, like the word Menashe means to forget. He's wounded in the forgetting vein, as if to say, don't forget your true name. Don't forget your name, right? And if you have to name, and you forget your name when you ask my name. When you ask my name, you are forgetting your name. We have the same name. When he asks the angel, what's your name? He's participating in the Gid Anasheh, in the vein of forgetting. You know my name. He says, Lama zeh tish'al lishmi. Why would you ask for my name? I'm like, really? My name? You don't know my name, Jacob? Come on, Jacob. You know my name. How could you not know my name? You just said it. You just said my name. And so he wrestles, right, until finally the sun comes up, and right, this is where you know, I mean, it's just remarkable. You know that this is a mythic structure. The sun comes up, and as all the rabbis say, you know, the reason the sun comes up here is because, you know, the forces of darkness at night that's when, you know, they weaken the side of holiness, and they give all kinds of metaphysical structures for it, but it's really much simpler than that. It's like when consciousness now returns, when the sun comes up again and the light is there, the shadow, right? The shadow can't remain because the light of consciousness has seen what it needs to see and healed. And then the last clue, of course, is the word solea, which means to limp. The only other time in the Torah where that word appears is in the story of Adam and Chava in Life Force and Humanoid and Earthling, where the side, the rib, is called a tzela, right? That's the rib, hutsolea. Really, it means like slaot or a side. So now he is limping with his split off